Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, we've always said your context tells us a lot about what's going on. And if the recent events are any indication, we know that the world is actually going through a very interesting time, whether you talk about the AI revolution, the ensuing tariff war that could happen. One thing is clear that companies are facing problems, nations are facing problems, managers are facing problems. And in an environment, so much of this disruption is becoming regular. How does one go about solving problems? Now, the old adage when we were in the backs in the B school to say that, don't tell me the problem, tell me the solutions. I think it might be passe for the simple reason the nature of problems are becoming more and more complex. But the fact remains that problems are there, and therefore it's a competency, it's a skill which is extremely critical for all managers, whether you're a senior leader or incoming Gen Z. Because if you've got good problem solving skills, it will eventually help you as a firm, at least, to think about innovation, better collaboration, decision making, and so on. But how does one go about actually building that skill set of problem solving? And to help us with that is just the guest. And I'm very happy, despite all the travels and a very busy schedule, Laura Darling, who has kindly agreed my guest to do this. Laura, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you. I'm happy to join you today.
Excellent. Laura, so I know you've been busy. Thank you very much again to make this early morning your time. Let's before we dive in, I've got questions on the topic and we'll dive into it. But as we do with all our episodes and all our guests, if I can request you to tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your great history and the work and the background that you have.
Okay, great. Well, I hail from Boston. So I've lived in Boston a long time and grew up in Massachusetts, um, which has been great. My education sort of brought me in the direction of finance, which was my early career, and then I went to Harvard Business School and came out and started working in the balanced scorecard arena back in the days when the balanced scorecard was new, and the issue was how can organizations chart their path forward beyond looking just at financials, right? That was the problem of the day, right? Is the stock market was so reactionary to financial indicators, but how could you have a longer term view? And so I did that for a long time, worked with Bob Kaplan, Dave Norton, so many other great professionals, and we built, a real consulting practice out of how to measure your strategy so that it's alive and well and growing. It was just super exciting. Since then, I've evolved from that because if you have a great process, this applies to so many business traits. If you have a great process like a balanced scorecard and so many others, it still boils down to leadership, right? You still need the people, not just at the top, but at the middle and at the bottom, because I believe leaders are at all levels. You still need qualified, educated, capable leaders to help drive that process. So I've shifted my focus more towards leadership, and as you know, in 2023, we released our book, 12 Skills, the guide to becoming a manager, the guide to becoming a stronger leader and accelerating your career. So 12 Skills, the guide to becoming a stronger leader and accelerating your career. And that's been just great. And I've had the opportunity now to start teaching at Harvard Extension School and teaching a course on that subject. So it's been super exciting. And as you say, the business world is getting more and more complex, right? So all of these skills matter just as much because so many people are learning the technical sides of their jobs, but they aren't learning the human behavioral capabilities. So it's been exciting.
Fabulous. Wow. Yeah, I'm really excited now. I think with all the work that you've shared with your Bostonings and what you're doing now, and of course, I want to also talk about the book a little later in the show. Let's begin, Laura. We're gonna kind of start and trying to simplify, maybe decode, demystify just the word problem solving. It's used fairly often in the business parlance. We use it if you're in the workplace context, right? When we use the term problem solving, right? Is that can you help us to understand what are we trying to like? There is in the engineering world, they say that okay, when you solve a problem, you try to make something, fix something, uh, you know, design something. But it's a more general term. So just help us to understand what does it mean when we say the word problem solving, and how relevant is it? Right? Is it something just important for the senior leaders, or we're going to talk obviously about Gen Z? Is something that even the younger managers should not think about.
Oh, it's super important, and as you say, when there's a lot of volatility in the macro and micro environment, there are problems, right? So the first question is, what's a problem? It's as simple as things aren't going as expected. Things aren't on plan. Maybe there's just a surprising result, or maybe things are broken. The reason that problem solving is so important for, I would say, mid to junior level people is because all too often, your very senior supervisors come to you and say, "We have this problem, find a solution." When in fact, they skipped the first, and you hurry to get about the business of solving that problem, right? As you said, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. But it's possible that the problem they brought you isn't even the right problem. Right? And if you're a junior person or a mid-level person just taking instructions and jumping into the problem solving, you've missed half the challenge right there, right? So I would say the perhaps the most important step is to step back and think, what is the problem? What is the issue? And what are we trying to solve? Rather than just getting about it, right? There is a bias to action that we have, especially at the beginning of our career. And I think that almost has to be resisted, even if for 10 minutes you take the time to say, "Wait, what is the issue?" I mean, I have this crazy, giant example of a client who came to me and told me that they spent millions and millions of dollars turning around a factory, just refurbishing the factory, updating the processes. And then they realized that that product line wasn't strategic anymore, so they sold the factory. Right? So just imagine if they'd said, "What's the problem?" And they realized that that was no longer strategic. So rather than spending the time and the effort that went into refurbishing a non-strategic factory, 10 minutes could have changed that path.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think is a great example, and I just want to kind of double click there, Laura, because for all of us who now in the leadership space or even in the consulting world, we had the luxury to speak to some more stakeholders, and we kind of try and kind of get to that problem, as you say, that have we found the right problem? Maybe because the client sees it one way, but if you're a manager, let's just say, take all of that everything out. I'm a young manager. I'm there. My boss says, "Hey, I gotta fix this for you," and I've got the pressure to say, I want to impress him or impress her. Uh, you make an excellent point that the definition of problem is so essential. Therefore, how do we go about it? Do I talk to more stakeholders? Do I talk to peers? Do I validate? Because there's a certain bias that comes from the problem, the person seeing it as a problem versus how do we independently, objectively see it, right?
Right. And I think the approach is not to say, "Yes, sir, yes, ma'am, but you've stated the problem incorrectly." That is not the best approach. So, I think with all problem solving, there's two main drivers. One is you have to have the right people in the room. I'll come back to that. And the other is you should have a process. And your first step should be to write a real problem statement. And I think if you step back to write a sentence, right? I mean, we're not talking about doing great analysis to prove your superiors wrong. It's actually just stepping back and saying, with an open mind and no preconceived conclusions or decisions, what really is the problem, right? So, um, if somebody comes to you and says, "Fix this thing," is that the thing? Is there a larger thing? And very often our supervisors will come to us and say, "I need you to solve this problem. I think it's probably X, Y, or Z." They well might be right. But let's go back and say, is there a user complaining? Right? Is there customer feedback? Are things just taking too long? And write out a statement of what is the problem, right? What is the problem without any preconceived notions? I have a friend, this is a real story, it's gonna sound crazy, who bought a teapot from London,
Mhm.
and the lid didn't fit properly in the teapot. And she wasn't happy about that. So she asked her friend who was heading to London, "Can you buy me a new lid for that teapot?" And the friend brought the new lid back. And she was really disappointed because that lid didn't fit properly either. She actually had another person buy her another lid. And that was the only point at which she thought, oh, maybe it's the pot. Right? So it turns out the hole in the pot was misshapen, right? So she jumped to solve that problem, easily solved. Except that wasn't the problem. So you really just want to take a minute to really think about the problem is the lid and the pot don't match. Yeah. Not the lid doesn't match. The lid is wrong. Right? And you can sort of turn that into you can make that as complex as you want. I worked for one organization who spent a lot of time, and this story is in the book. They spent a lot of time on quality. They were very, very committed to quality. And they stated their quality goal was 99.9%, which of course is absurd, but that's okay. That was their quality issue and quality goal. And so I asked what was their biggest quality problem that they spent the most time on. And they said, oh, it's on those neck labels, because they bottled. And they said, it's on those neck labels. They don't go on straight. Okay, so what have you done about this? And they start recounting all of the initiatives that they put in place to solve this problem of the neck labels going on crooked. So then I kind of looked at the marketing person and I asked, what do your customers say about the crooked neck labels? Our customers hate the neck labels. They wish there were no neck labels. The label comes off, the glue gets on your fingers. They hate the neck labels. And that was the first time when they all just sort of sat there and looked at each other. Oh. So in fact, the quality problem was easily addressed because the real issue was they didn't need, yes, there was an issue with the labels, which was irrelevant because the customers hated them. So you end up getting sort of siloed and just chasing your particular issue.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. People running to solve a problem, and they don't actually think about what's the problem.
Yeah. No, again, excellent. I think this is really I think this is very important for all our viewers, especially sort of the young Gen Zs thinking about that it is while like you say, um, it is important to solve it, but don't simply just kind of say, hey, yes, or yeah, I will come back. Take the time to question, take the time to and perhaps just an extension on that question here, Laura, is that if you're an individual, obviously you talked about a few things, but if you're in a team setting, right? What have you seen? What do companies do whom we normally admire, right? Are innovative. My sense would be they actually take the time to pinpoint or identify the problem. In other words, typically in some companies that yeah, there is a team leader and he or she says, "Hey, okay, this is the problem team. Let's brainstorm and start coming up with the ideas." When in fact that that itself needs to be questioned, right? So, what have you seen? I mean, are there companies which do a good job? And what's that process like?
Yeah, there really are. So like I said, there's kind of two steps, getting the right people in the room and following a process, right? And you can make your process as complex or as simple as you want, right? But it's really just about pausing and asking the right questions. And so the process that Ed Barrows, my co-author, and I lined out is sort of what we call D2A2, right? So there's two Ds. One is define the problem, right? Just without a solution in mind, define the problem. Is it a user problem? Is it a process problem? What kind of problem is it? Um, and then to take that problem and decompose it, right? Again, before you've done anything, right? Thomas Vettel-Vettelsberg has done a lot of work on defining a problem. And an example that he uses quite often is uh, tenants in a building come to the owner and say, you have to replace the elevator. It's too slow, right? So let's take that problem and decompose it. Is it the elevator? Right? Is it that the lobby is ugly and people don't like to stand there? Is it that music would keep them entertained? Maybe they hate the high rents and they're just causing trouble, right? So just decompose the problem and really, really brainstorm. Like really just think about this. It's a stupid idea, but I'm just going to put it out there because it might be a part of the problem, right? Just decompose and kind of build out a logic tree that you so often do. Is it the elevator? Is it the building, the tenants, the elevator, the engine, the mirror, and then extending that further. That again, it's really important, Nikhil, that you realize this. You can't slow down problem solving, right? So this doesn't need to take 4 weeks, right? This can take 4 minutes or 4 hours, right? Depending on the nature of the problem, right? So first define it, then decompose it, right? So you're looking at all possible contributors to a problem. Now your minds are a little more open, right? Just to sort of look at elements that you might not have looked at otherwise. And next, you do need to do the analysis, right? Now, it might be data collection for each of those drivers. It might be as simple as just asking why 5 times, right? Which is a straightforward, just why is this an issue? Why does it matter? Just keep asking why. But you are going to have to do some analysis to say, you know, this is an important factor. This is not an important factor. Great idea, Laura, but no, right? So depending on the size of the problem, you go out and you do some analysis. But even that has to be scoped, right? Because you don't want to fall into analysis paralysis, right? Where you're just analyzing. And again, you can be an individual sitting at your desk, but it's a lot better if you're working with other people on this because you need people to stretch your thinking a little bit. Then and only then are you ready to sort of focus down on a solution and move out and act. That, of course, is the last A. But there's something else that matters, and it's important as an individual contributor because the world isn't helping as much on this, which is you really do need other people to help broaden your thinking. So problem solving is too often now because we're so lean. Organizations are so lean that we often sit at our desk alone, right, and try and solve this problem with someone next to us trying to solve their problem. I would say this is one thing that Gen Zers and any individual contributor or even small group manager, you just owe it to yourself to say to someone, "Hey, can we spend a little time just talking?" Right? Because somebody else might have a totally different point of view and help stretch your thinking before you jump in and start solving the problem. There's so many biases out there, just thought biases that you really need to confront, right? And multiple points of view will help, right? There's anchoring bias, right? Which is the first idea I have is the best idea. I'm a good one for that. I always like my first idea best. Yes, and it might be the right idea,
Yeah.
right? But you still need to just test it. There's also sort of confirmation bias when you do your analysis. You lean towards your analysis leads you to the answer that your boss presented or that you think is the right one. But maybe someone else can say, "I look at that data differently." We all have different thought patterns. So that'll help as well. There's overconfidence bias where I know the answer. I do. As consultants, we're all guilty of that. I've seen this 3 times. I know the answer. Maybe, but maybe not, right? So at least you owe it again to the people you're working for. Um, Sunk cost, the sunk cost fallacy. I think of my factory example. I'm sure that's what happened there. They started to repair that factory. They'd spent millions on it. They surely weren't going to stop, right? So they went the whole way through before saying, "Huh, we don't need that factory." Right? So there's all sorts of decision-making biases that we fall prey to. And the other one is action bias, right? Which is, frankly, our boss comes to us and says, "I have this problem, I need you to solve it." Yep, I'll have it to you by the end of the day. Just you'll be better at everything you do in work if you just slow down for a minute and think as broadly as you can. The best way to do that is to bring other people in. There's another decision-making bias that I saw, uh, in real time just last week, and it's called, the groupthink bias. It was really interesting. I was working with senior executives, very senior executives, and they were given what they were told was a math problem, but it was really kind of a word problem with a little logic gap in it, but it was math. It was not hard. I suspect that a 5th grader could get it right, but we're not 5th graders. Our adult brains kind of complicate the way we think. So the facilitator in the room, who was not me, said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I want you to solve this. And then if your answer is above this threshold, go to that corner. Above that threshold, go to that corner. Over here, go. So the 30 people stood up, and I would say 20 people went to one corner, then 7 to another, and then 3 to another. I was in the back of the room doing the problem as well, and I agreed with the group of 20, which was interesting. And then the facilitator tried to give a pen. She kept trying to hand a pen to people, saying, "Okay, we're gonna do this until you've reached consensus." They all started just talking really fast. And then the group of 10 or the group of 7 over here shrugged their shoulders and said, "Yeah, you're right." And they went over to that corner. The other 3 just gave up and went over to the other corner. So there were a couple of things happening there. First of all, she said consensus. They already had consensus. She didn't say unanimity, right? So that's another thing with decision making is it's not necessary that every single person agrees, right? You have to get kind of to the 80% comfort. You all have to walk out of the room and say you agree. But so that was one thing. But then here's what was really interesting. The majority group that everybody joined was wrong. I I I was wrong too. I'd never seen anything like it. The people who were right, which were the group of 7, nobody took out a pen to say, "Here's the math, dummies." Nobody. They just talked. And then when asked, "Why did you move over?" They were like, "Well, because I know that one does a lot of technical work, and I know that one's smarter than me." It was purely based on personality. The entire room navigated over to the wrong answer. If you had told me that, I wouldn't have believed that it actually happened. And that's why you need the process, right? Because we tend to, oh, that's the smart one. That's the one who's expert in this. You really need, you really need a process to say, if someone had just said, show me the math, they would have found the right answer.
Yeah. No, wow. Laura, we could probably do one full episode on the different biases you mentioned, which are so crucial when you're trying to unpeel and look at the problem definition more objectively. I recall, many years back, we have a large client here, which where we kind of went through looking at their decision making process, and it turns out that 24 out of 25 people sort of had the same decision making style, which is, I mean, on one axis they had structured and unstructured, and individual versus as a group, and everybody wanted to make decisions with structured data and as individuals. And as a company, they were grappling with, like, why is it that the competitors are kind of moving faster than us? That is because that they always wanted finite information before they could move, and they were recruiting people like them. There's only one person who was sort of kind of the anomaly in that bell curve. But I think to your point, Laura, what can young managers do? I mean, I asked two questions here. Number one, are there certain frameworks that are out there, like you talked about the five why? And then again, we've in our work, like, we see that even perhaps the people who are more um falling prey to the biases are the more senior ones, because they see things and it just gets hardened into their system, right? And therefore, what advice would you have for the younger folks, right? So we're beginning careers, they may have just worked for 1 or 2 years, and here they are. So two questions. Number one, just are there some general frames to keep in mind? And then, of course, when you think about biases, like what just high level, some of the things that they can do to become more self-aware?
Yeah. It's an interesting challenge, and I think the younger folks in the workforce have an advantage. But because they're entering a world that is so rapidly changing, right? Nothing can be taken. We're literally in a time, you and I, where nothing can be taken for granted, and I think that'll hopefully um, broaden everybody's thinking. Rather than thinking they have the answer straight away, all of us have to stop now and say, "Wait, what could happen tomorrow that I haven't factored in today?" Um, So I think they have an advantage there. Is they aren't trained to sort of go with their gut or to have simple models in their head that can quickly get to a solution. So I'm hopeful that they're just a little bit more creative than we were trained to be. Because I shouldn't speak for you, but for me, it was kind of to s- to see patterns, right? I'm a pattern finder, and so that brings me very much to my preferred solutions. Um, so I think that'll give them an advantage, and I think that you do need to you do need to follow processes because we're all susceptible, right? And it doesn't really matter. I would said no consultant ever, right? And I'm obviously a recovering consultant. It doesn't really matter what frameworks
Yeah.
you follow, right? As long as you follow one. I'm a big fan of the work by Thomas Vettelsberg, who wrote a book called What's Your Problem? And he has a very structured process so that you can go through and frame your problem and reframe your problem. So I'm a big fan of that work, but I think it literally is as simple as a structured problem statement,
Yeah.
right? That does not suggest a solution. And then decomposing using a logic model and then the five whys, right? Just super straightforward. And then the analysis has to fit the type of problem. So I wouldn't be too prescriptive with what kinds of frameworks.
Yeah.
Um, because you can Google frameworks
Yeah.
to and I want to be clear that we needn't overcomplicate things because I suspect most of your listeners aren't making decisions whether or not to refurbish a factory or to sell it,
Yeah.
right? Like that's a multi-million dollar decision, which is a different kind of decision. But when you're just trying to solve a problem, just pause. What is the problem? So neighbors are rallying to close a nightclub earlier. Why are they rallying to close a nightclub? Well, because it's too noisy at closing time. Ok okay. Is closing the only option, right? Or can we have Ubers lined up out front so that they can leave quickly, right? Or can we have a staging area a little further from the homes so that the noise isn't in the neighborhood? But we get the answer. We get the answer in our minds too quickly. And I think it's the perfect kind of approach for individual contributors because their problems tend to the decisions that they have to make, the problems they have to solve are a little more bounded. So with a little creativity, they can kind of get there.
Yeah.
Now, how they can influence up
Mhm.
is another interesting challenge, right? I mean, we get to model behavior for our seniors as well, right? So if they get in the habit of making these things explicit, you'll see managers say, "Oh, I wouldn't have thought of it that way." That is the best compliment any mid-level person can get is, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you write out a problem statement, if you decompose it, if you show your analysis, again, not taking 27 weeks to do so,
Yeah.
they'll be able to come with you
Yeah.
and you'll change their frame without having to go to them and say, "Dear supervisor, you were short-sighted, closed-minded." You needn't do that. Right, right, exactly. And you can bring them in too, right? If they're open-minded, right? But you just wanna avoid the people who are just get it done. Just do it. And I'm a just do it person, right? So this is a discipline that I kinda have to force on myself. But I'm lucky in my life because my husband, who I love, is completely a different thinker than I am, right? He's an engineer by trade. So he just sees things in a different structure. And I think that's a model for work, right? Is find the person. There's a reason that we have all of these personality and style tests, right? There's a reason that we have DISC and Hogan and LVI. There's a reason, and it's because people think differently. And some people need data. Some people need to talk. Some people need to read. Bring those different brains, those great different brains all together in one room.
Yeah.
Again, not for 8 weeks.
Yeah. No, excellent. I think, well, I think you make, I think there's plenty out there, but it's more about following a process. One thing I do just before it slips, Laura, one thing I do want to talk about, especially as we're talking about Gen Z, is that we were talking about critical thinking and looking at objectively. It is the fact that they have at their fingertips, generative AI, and it can be both a double-edged sword, right? And there's so much being talked about it around the world now. What guidance would you have? Because do you sense that it can almost dim down my problem-solving ability? That could be the one sort of devil's advocate view. And the second question is that what have you seen in your career with all the firms and the leaders that you talk around the world, that is this like a muscle that manager builds over time, right? In other words, people who become good at problem solving, is it not about mastering one or two frameworks, right? What is it that they do that over a period of time, like we always normally say that engineers are very good with problem solving because it's the very nature of what they have to do. Um, but if you think about, someone from, let's say, a liberal arts background or a creative background, right? I mean, they see problems in a different way too. So, and just an advice, or just your observation, because a lot of our viewers and the Gen Z generation has so much more choice of their careers, right? And so, curious to know, when you think about something like an AI, what would you say to keep that in mind as you think about problem solving, versus also how do you see good managers, strengthening their problem solving ability over time?
Yeah, so two good questions. So first of all, let's full disclosure, not an expert on AI. Um, but or and I think the most of us in our daily existence aren't super engaged with generative AI, right? We're just kind of out there, using ChatGPT in our normal existence. But so the downside to using AI is that it's going to go out there in the world and collect everything, kind of average it and present it back to you. So that's the downside. The upside is it's going to go out there in the world and grab everything that's out there. So the, it might include something. So there's nothing wrong with if you're in your decompose phase. There's nothing wrong with asking, your whatever your AI system is, what might be the cause of this problem, because it it might it might trigger one or two ideas that you wouldn't have thought of, right? Any idea that's thrown your way can be rejected out of hand, right? It's not going to cost you any time. So I think it's actually a pretty good idea to just ask that question, because they might remind you of a basic that you had overlooked, or it might be insane, but it jogs your brain to being more open. So I think it's worth doing. Um, just don't lose too much time to it, right? I think like anything, it's an input. Now, who knows where the future will take us? This might be totally different just 5 years from now. Um, but then how to build the skill? It really is it's as simple as practice, and the world, at least in my experience, the world will not encourage you to build a structured way to make decisions. The world will tell you to hurry up and make decisions and move on. Solve the problem, fix it as quickly as possible. And that's what they want. So I think no one is encouraging us to build skills. I think people who have a good instinct, right? That's always the phrase. They have good instincts. They can really solve problems very quickly. Um, that's You're going to run into problems there. So I really do recommend that you practice so you get better at this, right? Because some people don't have that instinct, right? Sometimes you need to do analysis, like maybe even math. Um, People who come from liberal arts, which you brought up, you, that's another way of pointing at a different kind of brain. They have a real advantage because they've been taught to think more broad. Gross stereotype, forgive me, but they've actually been trained to think more broadly. So instead of looking at the process steps, they might be the one to say, maybe it's something about the employees, right? Maybe it's about how the employees are interacting, or maybe it's because the environment is wrong. Like they just might have a totally different view. Um, that's real, right? I mean, we're pretty efficient in our business practices now. It's not as simple, we're coming out of a phase where optimizing processes was all we had to do. It's not that simple anymore. We really do have to think about the process, the inputs, the supply chain, the environment, the physical environment, the macro environment. We have to think about a whole lot more, and it'll serve us well as individuals to both work with others and practice a process so that we remember to think of all these different perspectives, and then we can be the fresh point of view in the room. But I'm sorry to say I don't think the world is going to encourage you to grow this skill. They want you to have it. They want you to be able to solve problems, and they want you to be able to solve problems quickly. But it's a rare manager who's going to sit down with you and say, "How should we look at this problem?" Right? It's a rare manager who's going to say, "Did you consider the problem statement?" So I'm sorry about that answer, but I think the one advantage, another advantage that the Gen Zers have is they know that they're in charge of their own career. They're not waiting, they're not expecting a company to grow them and give them their career. So as long as you're responsible for building your own skills and building your own resume, right? Then you have to grow. You have to grow these capabilities. You have to read about problem solving. You have to read about these skills and grow them yourselves and find the people that can help you. I mean, supervisors aren't uh they aren't evil by any stretch. So you find the people who can help you grow, who do want to help you build those skills. But it's a rare manager out there who's got the time, but you owe it to yourself to
Yeah. No, wow, beautiful. I I really like it. I think because just the other day where we were talking about it's becoming incumbent about every manager, doesn't matter where you are, to look at things as we use the term transdisciplinary sort of angle, which is to say that I cannot no longer take the view that and I'm an expert in X and therefore I will keep my head down and what happens next door is someone else's problem because I think COVID was our best example of that, right? Where we had to not just forget what we knew about making vaccines, but we had to think about, okay, who's going to get it first? How are we going to ship it? How are we going to price it? What's the communication strategy? And I think the person who was very good at making the vaccine hadn't solved the problem. I mean, that was one of the problems. That was part of the problem. That's a much larger problem. And so I think you make a good point now. One couple of one questions here, Laura. One is, of course, um, and you make the point about the rare manager. So let's talk now as sort of closing down to say that okay, if I'm a manager, but before that, let's just one other question, which is to say that what have you seen? Are there companies which have done this well, and what role does the culture play? And because if I'm a young manager, yeah, well, this is all great advice, but you know what? My boss wants this back from me by 5 p.m. EOD tomorrow. And so I may not have the luxury, but I think just more generally, which is important for them to know and do their homework, and as you say, they owe it to themselves and looking at the careers and the companies they choose to work for, and therefore, what is been your experience, the role that the culture plays when you think about companies who have successfully done this?
yeah. Culture really matters. And as you say, there are some cultures which are just get it done. Just get it done cultures. And there are some industries where that kind of fits, right? Speed matters, accuracy doesn't, right? I mean, it's hard for the human brain to accept that, but some industries are like that. First matters more than accuracy. And so that's going to penetrate an organization. And by the way, those are fun places to be. Those are exciting, that's an exciting environment. In contrast, you have organizations who are so deliberate and often so regulated that there's no room for a misstep, right? So everything has to be All I's and all T's have to be dotted perfectly before anyone can move. Like I said, often regulated, so they don't have a choice either. That sounds tedious, but the advantage that they have is once they move, it is with conviction, right? It takes forever to move, but once they move. So those are different cultures, and I think that each of them values quality problem solving, but they probably wouldn't look at it that way, right? They probably aren't teaching it the same way, right? The more deliberate, more regulated, more precise uh, organization is going to teach you how to analyze, right? That's what they do teach. They do teach analyze, and they often or analysis, but they often forget the part that comes before it. But they spend so much time on the analysis that you have enough time to go back and kind of ask the hard questions. The other place that's trying to get first, they're probably not going to teach problem solving or just get it done. But think of the value you can add by providing a little bit of focus. So you're not always going to have a culture that's going to reward great problem solving right away. But for goodness sakes, there's no walk of life where better problem solving isn't better. Like it is an absolute truth that better problem solving is better. Um, so that's when it kind of gets back to you and you're building your capabilities. So I'd say you can't take a pass just because the culture is too aggressive. Rapid problem solving is a thing, right? So, find your rapid problem solving pattern.
Yeah. No, excellent. You're absolutely right. I think in a career that could be 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades, there's a good chance that one may see two systems, or if you're lucky to see one good system. But then I think for most of us who worked enough to say that, yeah, you need to be agile and kind of be able to objectively decipher that. Okay, this is what worked in that context. This is what I need to do in this context. So that's an excellent advice. Now, what just as a way to close out, if some call to action, like if you are a young Gen Zer, you know, um, you've talked about problems, we've talked about the nature of problems becoming complex, we talked about how AI and critical thinking and the system that you could be in. What can they be doing? What is the one or two things that they should keep in mind as you think about, Laura, the problem solving competency for the Gen Z, right? So that's the first part of the question. Second is, if I'm a manager and I really like, I'm gonna go back to say that you're that rare manager, right? Because I think today with the amount of pressure, it's not that the managers are, as you say, they're not the one to be evil. They're it's the pressure from the investors, the pressure of the customers, and the pressure every corner of the system. So, two points on do's and don'ts for the Gen Z, and maybe the do's and don'ts for the manager if you're undertaking sort of someone in a tutelage. So yeah, what would you say?
So let me start with the manager and forgive me for the noise in the background if that's coming through.
No.
Um, the manager also has to worry about their career and their success and their leadership, right? So that is their job, and it's also what they need to propel themselves. I will tell you that being a talent magnet is the most important thing they could do for their career, right? That manager who has people who want to work with them, who want to help them, that is the most powerful manager. You might not have formal power yet, but if you have the informal power of resources of people who want to help you, want to work with you, there's nothing better than that. So I happen to think that we all have an ethical obligation to develop the people who work for us because that's part of our value proposition. They don't have to work for us, right? But we can add value to their lives and to the organization by really developing them and making them better. And that includes teaching them how to dress for success. That includes teaching them how to present. That includes teaching them how to write a memo. A lot of these things you used to learn in school and you don't now, and supervisors and managers have to teach it. So the better they are at growing their young talent, which often we forget because young talent tends to move on, right? They tend to leave the organization, but their contributions don't leave, right? So I think we have an obligation to grow those people. X% of them are going to stay with you or are going to send their good friends to come work with you. I think it's a real differentiator to be a real talent magnet. People are in line to come work for you. And a good manager, people want to work for you if you're going to grow them as a young professional. I think that's 100% true. But for the Gen Zers, I think, you know, every new generation to the workforce has been labeled in some way, shape, or form, right? They don't work as hard as I used to work 27 hours a day. They're every new generation is labeled in some way, and then they find their unique gifts and they contribute. Though the what I teach, as I mentioned, at Harvard Extension School, and a lot of my students are Gen Zers, and we had a class on this subject. How can Gen Zers work with baby boomers and everybody in between? How? And and they were fantastic because if they weren't Gen Zers, they supervised Gen Zers, and they sort of sat back and crossed their arms and said, there's nothing wrong. Gen Zers aren't difficult. There's nothing wrong with Gen Zers. We just want to know why. And I said, right. But when a baby boomer, gross generalizations, when a senior person comes to you and asks you to do something and you say, why? I imagine like that feels almost disrespectful to them. And they were like, yeah, but that's stupid. We're going to do it. We just want to know why. And it was really interesting. And so my first piece of advice is if why is your first question, say, okay, could you explain why? That would be my, that would be my first piece of advice. So your first answer should be yes. Um, but my real advice is keep that. Keep that needing to understand why. Because it is a different orientation. I was never taught to ask why. I was taught to get it done and very quickly and perhaps invisibly, right? I mean, these are the olden days where I stood behind the executives and passed them the answer, right? Never lose that needing to know why. You have to be 100% respectful, but knowing why is the most important thing to know. And I would say just never surrender that, no matter how much they try and beat you out of it. Just always understand why is this, yes, I will work on this, but why is this important to you? Why is it important to the organization? Why is it important to the world? I'm going to work on this. I'm not saying, I just want to understand your point of view on why this is important. How can anybody object to that? So just don't lose it. It would be my advice.
Yeah, no, wow. I hope that all the managers, as you say, are listening to this, which is, I really like the 2 points. One is about the talent magnet, right? It doesn't really matter where in the system, where in the hierarchy you are. It is what you do beyond just the problem solving, right? It's simple as writing simple memos and just giving them the tools to succeed. But I think is also the orientation, as you put it, that maybe in one generation, in our generation, perhaps it was more about like don't question the boss or do it, and that's the way it should be. Yeah, and I think the managers need to be a little more welcoming and receptive of the fact that it isn't to be interpreted in a form of dissent or but it's the curiosity. And I think on the Gen Z side, I also like that the fact that like you have the right to question, but also respect the generation on the other side who comes with a small amount of experience and the context in which they're working. I think that really, really kind of tells the story, right? What you may have seen in college versus one company in a startup versus, let's say, a large company, right? It could be very, very different. So I think those are some excellent pieces of advice. So, Laura, this has been one fabulous conversation. Before we close out, I do want you to share a little bit about the book that you've written, as well as where can people find you, and are there any social media handles or other places to find the book as well as the work that you do.
I'll put the book in my hand because it's got a sort of a long title, right? So it's 12 Skills, The Guide to Becoming a Stronger Leader and Accelerating Your Career. And we wrote this book probably for your audience. We wrote it for mid-level career people and below. And part of the reason that we wrote it is because so many organizations invest a lot of money in their high potential employees. So what is that? Is that 5% of their employees? Is that 10% of their employees? I don't know, but that either leaves 95% or 90% remaining. And that's most of us, right? And not everybody can go get a fancy MBA or stop working to go off to school. And so what are, we asked and researched for all the models out there, what are the basic elements of leadership that these folks need to know? And so it's not, how to be a CEO book. It's not. It's how to become a stronger leader and advance in your career. Right? So it includes when you have to give a presentation, how do you structure your message to appeal to your audience? These are the things that we're just not taught anymore, right? Or how literally to to build your executive presence so that people will see you as you're growing in your career, they'll see you differently, right? How to work with talent, how to be a talent manager. Like these are the basic skills that you need to grow and be a lawyer, but you know, because organizations are moving at such a pace, they don't teach it. And so you owe it to yourself to learn it. And so I'd say this is a good sort of survey study, and it's also written kind of as a manual or a handbook, right? It describes the skills, you can self-assess, and it gives real concrete actions on what to do next to get started. So I've talked to a number of people who have worked with the book and really made a lot of the changes and actually gotten promoted as a result. So that's
Right.
that's what we were looking for, is how to actually help folks who are looking to get ahead.
Lovely. That's the proof itself. And Laura, where can they find the book? Is the book on some of the
The
e-commerce?
book is on Amazon. Yeah. And, all the online places where you buy your books.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So I will definitely sort of I know that as you say, it's a compilation of 12. What may often is that you said, you think about some basic competencies, but we undermine the importance of how good we need to become, all of us, even with experience, and because so much is changing, and therefore it's a great way to look at, okay, if I'm good at three, what do I do with the other three? Or if I'm good.
Great. People always ask me, "What's your favorite skill?" I'm like, "Well, you can't have a favorite child." But if I was gonna start somewhere, I would start with executive presence because I feel like it's really gone the way of the
Oh, yeah,
dog.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that is again is a skill that senior managers, they become very competent in one way, but when you go from becoming good at what you do, with influencing people, and how you carry yourself, that's a whole new game, right? So, Laura, thank you once again. Really appreciate the time, and I think we've had a fantastic episode. I really look forward. I think on a side note, and we spoke last time, my son did get into Quest Strong, so but he's still evaluating. Yeah, he's got a Dean scholarship.
Right.
Yeah,
Please.
so we'll see if Boston is where we end up. But thank you once again, and I look forward to meeting you in person at some point. And travels bring us to the place that we're there. And all the very best, and have a great week.
Absolutely. Thank you very much and good luck.
Bye.
Bye bye.